This video is sponsored by Batch. So imagine you were given $100 bazillion, unlimited time, and one of the greatest animation studios in Japan, and were told to get all that and create an anime adaptation of a dank meme. The result would be crap, since you're generally not supposed to put a high-end production in the hands of a random person, unlike Netflix. Let's say you put that task in the hands of some extremely talented individuals I couldn't be bothered to research, and what do you get instead? Comedy flipping gold. Nichijou, also known as My Ordinary Life, is a show that's the exact opposite of your ordinary life. While most of you haven't seen it, you may have seen some out-of-context clips floating around the wonderful world of the internet and thought, haha, that's pretty crazy, but I'm sure it makes more sense in context, right? Right? Yeah, this is supposed to be a slice of life, but it's more like a slice of weed. Just trying to explain what's supposed to be happening in this show is enough to send you on a psychedelic fun trip, because this show isn't normal. It operates on a completely different set of rules from most other anime, and because of that, it can be pretty confusing to get into, especially if you're a normal person. But worry not, my dear viewer, for this video will be the Introductory Brandon guide to Nichijou for noobs. Starting with the characters. Well, Nichijou has a whole ton of different characters. Most of it follows two main groups, the high school girls and the members of the Shinonome household. Starting with the high school girls, I'm going to talk about my personal favorite character first, and that's Yuko. Now, don't misunderstand. Usually when I have these kind of conversations about who's my favorite, it's usually about who's best girl or something. But that's not the case here at all. No. This is very different from that. The reason Yuko is my personal favorite character in Nichijou it's because she's one of the most painfully relatable characters I've ever seen. She is me. She's my spirit animal. I swear, half the entire show is just Yuko suffering in some form, and while I laugh at how true it is, I also cry on the inside at how true it is. Like watching her make a joke and nobody responds. So she thinks they didn't hear her, so she says it again, and her friends just stare at her. So she spends the entire episode thinking she did something wrong when she really didn't. I felt that. Like, bruh, you literally just summed up my life. She spends the entire show not doing her homework. But one day, she actually does do it. She goes into class, all happy, checks her bag, and it's gone. There is one scene where she takes the train and a random person says, "Would you like some bread?" And she says, "No, thank you," but then it turns out it was for their dog. And in her embarrassment, she stands up to get off the train and waits at the door, only for the opposite one to open. And then she rushes out and bumps into someone and apologizes profusely, only to then realize it's just a statue. And meanwhile, this one girl is just watching her the entire time, trying not to laugh. It hurts! And finally, there's a coffee shop scene, where Yuko has a mental breakdown trying to understand how their new menu works for like 5 minutes, until in the end, she just finally gives up and just give me whatever. And after all of that, all she gets in the end is a tiny cup of depression. And when she brings her friend to the same coffee shop, fully expecting her to be just as lost and confused as she was, the friend goes up to the counter and gets it perfectly. This poor girl is the butt of almost every joke, and you just want to give her a shoulder to cry on after everything she's been through, to be bros with her. And then there's Mio. She's also sort of relatable in a few aspects, like how she makes embarrassing drawings and will go to hell and back to make sure that nobody ever sees them. But the majority of her screen time really consists of her screaming at Yuko. And it's fantastic. These scenes will go on for like 5 minutes straight, and yet it somehow manages to get funnier as it progresses because the absurdity just keeps escalating. And finally, there's Mai, who has an outer front of being the stereotypical quiet girl, but her true personality is almost the exact opposite. She's a troll. She constantly has a blank expression on her face, and yet nothing brings her more joy than leaving people absolutely gobsmacked. And the person she loves to troll the most, of course, is Yuko! Yeah, you see what I mean about Yuko being the butt of every joke? At this point, it shouldn't even be called My Ordinary Life anymore. It should be called Bullying Yuko. What's this? Yuko's taking a test and is trying to concentrate? Don't mind me. I'm just gonna casually stand up and disappear from my desk, recreate a Michelangelo painting, and when all is said and done, casually take my hair off. What's this? We're playing red light, green light? Well, I'm gonna turn around on red light and just stay there. Oh, you need my help drawing something? Well, don't mind me if I take a few, artistic liberties. What, you want me to fix it? Very well, I'll fix everything but the problem. What? Just start again and just draw the panel borders and nothing else? Nah, bro, the paper was calling. Time to create an entirely new story. That makes no sense. Everything she does is just a giant middle finger to everything and everyone. Not necessarily in a way where she's a jerk, but more so in the way where she just confuses people. She's completely unpredictable, and that's what makes her such a great foil to the rest of the characters. But these three girls, at the end of the day, are normal. And as you could probably tell by now, normal is just not the Nichijou way, my friends. Which brings us to the second group, the Shinonome household. This group consists of the little adventures of a child genius professor named Hakase and a robot caretaker Nano. Hakase just created Nano one day for whatever reason, and Nano, despite being a robot, is basically a living person in every sense. She feels pain, has emotions, and has severe social anxiety. The only real differences are some random useless features that she has and a giant key sticking out of her back, which is the main cause of her anxiety since it's basically a giant flag that says, "Hey look everyone, I'm a robot." The relationship these two have is amazing though. It's incredibly adorable and is also one of my favorite parts of the show, because even though Hakase is the creator, the two are basically sisters, with Nano being the older sister who takes care of Hakase the entire time. And Hakase, despite being a technical genius, is also one of the most accurately well-written child characters I've ever seen in anime, right alongside Anya from Spy Family. Her inventions rarely ever have any kind of practical use, and she just does it for her own amusement. She'd randomly add modifications to Nano that are completely useless in the end just because she feels like it. She acts like a spoiled brat and throws tantrums if she doesn't get what she wants, but also gets scared over thunder at night. Basically, she just acts like how a normal 8-year-old child would act if they just happened to be a genius. But she's still a child. Like at one point, they find a stray cat and she goes, "Hey, wouldn't it be neat if you could talk?" And so she creates a scarf that allows animals to talk, gives it to the cat, and it works! It turns out the cat has the personality of a middle-aged man who demands respect, and yet Hakase just continues treating him like a squishy cat for the rest of the show. They name him Sakamoto, and now he's a new main character, creating an entirely new dynamic between the three of them. An immature child professor, a robot with social anxiety, and a squishy cat tsundere. So yeah, these two main groups are the main focus of the show, and while there are a ton of other great characters too, usually it focuses on these guys. Now the reason I talked about these characters first before I talked about the actual plot is because the plot is kind of weird. Part 2. How on earth does a show even work? Right from the beginning, the show just kind of throws you in the deep end by showing you all these different things at once and explains none of it. The first episode doesn't really feel like the first episode and feels more like you started in the middle of things, which means that for a lot of people, it can take some getting used to before you really get what this show is about and what it's trying to do. So I'll just say this. Simply put, it's a huge collection of short skits. Think Psyche-K but on steroids. It's all linked together by the characters, but for the most part, each skit is its own thing. Sometimes it's an entirely new thing that never comes back. Sometimes it's a continuation from what was happening before. And sometimes it actually becomes more story focused for a little bit where things change, only going back to the usual slice of life shenanigans afterwards. Now in most normal anime, this is where you'd expect it to stop. But not Nichijou. This is only the main base for the show, but then it goes and adds even more stuff on top. There are even shorter skits between all the main skits, and these ones make even less sense. It introduces completely new characters that we've never seen before, and after it's over, we never see them again. These skits specifically are called Helvetica Standard, as in the font. Why? I don't know. I'm still confused on that, to be honest. But then, Nichijou goes ahead and adds even shorter skits between the skits, and these ones do involve the main characters, usually lasting like 10 seconds this time, whether it shows them doing a cute dance, or showing off something cool for no reason, a random philosophical quote, or maybe running jokes with them playing rock, paper, scissors, or jump rope with a different thing happening each time. And okay, you're not gonna believe this. We get even shorter intermissions between these skits. But the special thing about these ones is that the focus isn't really on any particular situation or joke. More so, they're hyper-realistic static shots that have an insane level of detail to them, like an art piece. There's a dedicated one for each episode, except every time it's used, there's a slight change each time. Whether it just be a box in the background moving along, or some clothes on the clothesline, or even just someone straight up walking up to the camera and looking at it. Just a few seconds of being able to step back and appreciate the serene beauty. Give yourself a little bit of time to recover your senses before jumping back into the main stuff again. It sort of balances things out, and I really appreciate them being there. None of this technically really needs to be there, but at the same time, you could say the same thing about the rest of the show. Everything is equally as pointless as the next thing, but that in itself is kind of the point. All of this basically encapsulates the structure of how Nichijou works, but for the most part, it honestly just feels like the show just does whatever it feels like at the time. And strangely enough, it worked. All this might have sounded complicated from the way I described it, but as soon as I understood what Nichijou was going for, it actually wasn't convoluted or messy in the slightest. It just flowed from one thing to the next smoothly, and it was fairly simple to go along with. Mostly. But then there's the actual contents of the skits, which is an entirely different story. From the way I described some of the things that happen in Nichijou, I made it sound like they were functional and made sense. But that's just because I chose the ones that were easy to explain. Okay, remember that VeggieTales clip where they predicted internet humor way before it was an actual thing?
In the future, entertainment will be randomly generated. Randomly generated?
Randomly generated.
Why did the chicken cross the road?
I don't know. Why did the chicken cross the road?
Weed eater.
Now that's funny.
That doesn't make any sense.
It's funny because it's unexpected.
Yeah, that's Nichijou. I'd say a solid 50% of Nichijou is just an extremely high effort and well animated Schmidt post that somehow managed to make it to the small screen. Nichijou straight up predicted Gen Z humor before it was even a thing, and many times I'm laughing without even knowing what the flipping joke is. Like, if someone asked me to explain exactly what is so funny about Yuko standing in the halls and accidentally seeing her principal go out and suplex his pet deer, I wouldn't know what to say. It's just funny because it's random. Just watch the scene, you'll understand what I mean. There are also a bunch of jokes that are very reliant on you living in Japan in order to understand them. You have to have the prior knowledge in order to get the joke, and since most of us don't live in Japan, we can't tell the difference on whether it's a Schmidt post or a legitimate Japanese joke. Hmm?
何勘違いしてるんですか。銅の部分を開けてごらんなさい。
What? If I didn't actually do my research after watching this, I never would have understood this joke. Apparently straw dolls are supposed to be a voodoo curse thing that's bad, but there's also this bean snack that is commonly wrapped in straw. So the joke is that he thinks it's a cursed doll at first, but then he opens it up and it's just a snack. Which I had no possible way of knowing before watching this. I also just know that there are a ton of puns in this show, and I just didn't catch any of them because they don't make sense in English. So instead of thinking it's funny because of the actual joke, I'm just thinking, haha, funny, because he made weird noise and smashed his face into the floor. Basically just get used to not understanding a bunch of the jokes that will happen, and you will have a much better time watching it. There are also more satirical jokes that make fun of certain anime tropes, like this girl whose entire character literally just exists to make fun of tsunderes. Like, most tsunderes would be like, idiot, it's not like I like you or anything, or if they're extra spicy, they'll slap them. This girl has guns and will shoot the guy for breathing. The guy isn't hurt though, somehow he just brushes it off like it's another Tuesday. Nobody questions the fact that she just casually has access to military weaponry and brings it to school every day, because unlike America, that's not normal here. But then again, in the world of Nichijou, this is the least of our concerns. Regardless though, getting the trope and exaggerating it this much to show how absurd it is hilarious. However, while a lot of Nichijou is obviously meant to be comedic, not all of the skits are necessarily intended to be that way. There are also a lot of skits that aren't actually trying to be jokes and are more so just interesting ideas, little concepts that make you go, huh, yeah, that's actually very interesting. Like, the one thing that I believe Nichijou absolutely excels at is capturing those lingering thoughts that we constantly think of throughout the day. The kind that we forget about right after thinking them and never really pay much attention to, but they just kind of pop in on their own accord. The random thoughts that we randomly blurt out when we were kids, but learned to ignore as we got older. Nichijou gets those little ideas born from our active imagination and actually visualizes them, bringing the thoughts that we never expected would even see the light of day and actually bringing it into reality in the form of a high production show. And that in itself is an incredibly unique and fascinating idea. Like, what if toast popped out of the toaster, but instead it kept going and smashed into the roof? Or a rainbow just being perfectly aligned with a building so it looks like it's coming out of it? Or even just the first thing that happened in the show is just a question. If you have no motivation, how do you find the motivation to get motivated? Well, you just do it. And that's true in a sense. Sometimes when you're feeling demotivated, the only real way to get out of it is to stop overthinking it and you just do it. It's the first thing that happens in the entire show, and it's not even a joke. It's just random philosophy. And sometimes the quotes aren't even anything philosophical, it's just something totally random, like, I want to go to New Orleans, and then it just ends. Like, the standard skit in Nichijou is just, squatting is good for the bones. Michael Jackson. But in regards to all the absurd stuff I just talked about before, even if you don't particularly get the sort of thing, or it doesn't really make sense to you, it's okay, since it always moves on from that very quickly onto something that's a lot more comprehensible. There's still a good chunk of the show that would still make sense even if you don't have any prior context, and there are still plenty of sequences that stand on its own as being funny. And sometimes not all the jokes are funny even if you do get it, sometimes they miss, but that's okay, since they usually don't overstay their welcome anyways and the show just moves on. But even so, it's still very much a niche anime that does things very differently. differently. If you're very new to anime and don't know that much about Japan or Gen Z humor, you might still enjoy it, but you're a lot less likely to. But if you happen to enjoy absurdist comedy and it sounds exactly like the sort of thing you'd enjoy, you'll probably love it. Think of it like a tier 10 meme where not everyone will really get it, but those who do will love it and appreciate it that much more. But with all that said, I believe the one part of Nichijou that truly takes the spotlight here is the great thing about Nichijou is that it has this really unique art style where it looks cute, bubbly, and simplistic, almost to the point where it seems easy to draw. But this simplicity allows the animators to suddenly kick things into overdrive with some of the most insane, high effort, and over-the-top animation that rivals the likes of Attack on Titan. Seriously, it'll switch between these two modes at the blink of an eye, and the transition is seamless. Now, usually I don't talk about the animation and music, or at least not enough to warrant an entire section for it, but with Nichijou specifically, it needs to be brought up because without it, you'd lose a huge part of what makes Nichijou good in the first place. Nichijou would be a very risky type of show to adapt because the biggest reasons these skits work so well is because of how it's presented. If Yuko going Super Saiyan trying to catch her octopus wiener before it hits the floor wasn't this over the top and well animated, then this scene wouldn't have worked because the joke would be gone. Mio trying to catch Yuko before she discovers her yaoi drawings is still the best animated flash sequence that I've seen and is still yet to be topped. Them being bitten by a dog and it's so painful that laser beams shoot out of their head and destroys the entire solar system. Many of the jokes in Nichijou rely on bringing the most mundane, tiny, insignificant seeming things in our day-to-day lives and exaggerating it so it looks as big as it feels to us in that moment. Explosive, dynamic, epic. And the best part is that the music sounds like this. The most disastrous situation could be happening with everything falling apart. The world could be crumbling. And yet it will play the most calm, relaxing, and serene music. And it's funny as heck, there's just something that sends me about watching a cup coming out of the dispenser upside down and then the drink just pours out and slowly spills everywhere while the characters just stand there watching it happen. And all the while, the music just continues playing without a worry in the world. Now, it obviously doesn't do this every time, but it works so well whenever it does. The stark difference between the actual situation and the nice music adds so much more to the comedy, but at the same time, when all is said and done, it has this element of beauty to it as well. Also, this show has some of the greatest bruh faces in history. But truly, the greatest scene that utilizes the music is this scene with the card tower. There is zero dialogue throughout this entire scene. No sound effects, nothing but just the orchestral soundtrack and good visual storytelling. All it is just them trying to put the last two cards on the card tower without it collapsing. But the way the music gets more and more intense as they're about to put down the cards, really building up to that moment as something huge makes it seem 1,000 times more terrifying and hilarious. The music basically carries this entire scene and the emotions that happen in it. The victory, the panic, the depression. It's difficult to explain what makes it so funny. It's just one of those things that you've got to experience for yourself. So after you watch this video, watch this clip, because if there's one Nichijou clip that I'd recommend you the most, it's this one. I'll put a link in the description and in the cards above. But yeah, in conclusion, Kyoto Animation did a spectacular job. Part 4, the themes. Okay, now this is the point in the Standard Brandon Talks video where I talk about the substance of the story, where it's all deep and meaningful, and there's sad music playing in the background where I talk about character development in a very deep voice. Yeah, that doesn't really apply here. Not because Nichijou doesn't have any substance, but because, as per usual, it goes about it in a very unconventional way. There is character growth. There are moments that take themselves seriously and are extremely sweet and heartwarming. There are even some little story arcs involving certain characters. But I think what Nichijou is really all about is subtly interwoven throughout all of it. It's strange because I don't think there is one specific life lesson that you really get from Nichijou. Instead, closer to real life, it's more unexpected, random almost, not being confined to a particular structure or way of doing things, where events come and go out of nowhere and come back when you least expect it, or they never come back at all. People change and grow at totally different rates and times, or they stay the same because they're already happy the way they are. Sometimes we have goals, and other times the only thing we really have on our minds are the little insignificant things that don't make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things, but still matter to us in that moment. And while nothing is really predictable and we never can really know what's gonna happen next, we continue regardless. And I think in that aspect, Nichijou really does encapsulate what a lot of life is really about. Or at the very least, it gets us to stop and look at the little things and adds value to it. To look at it from a different point of view and just appreciate it. It doesn't always spell out the message for you, but just by seeing the way things turn out, you just sort of understand. Whether it be an old man who goes from complaining about all his life worries to deciding to focus on the good things in life too, or Mio's friends going out of their way to do something nice for her when she's feeling down, or even something as simple as Hakase and Nano being there to comfort each other when they're scared during a thunderstorm. Or heck, you might as well just throw 90% of their interactions in there for being the most wholesome thing on earth. But to me, the scene that I believe best defines what Nichijou is about overall is, strangely enough, the scene where Mio loses it and gets in a fight with Yuko. It starts off with a misunderstanding, with Yuko, unsurprisingly, mucking something up. She misheard Mio and got her the wrong food, which Mio can't eat because there was no rice. Upset at this, she tries to get Yuko to get another one, but Yuko doesn't have any money, so dejected, Mio goes to get her own wallet and the situation turns into a full-blown argument. Mio and Yuko are hurling insults at each other and the situation gets more and more ridiculous as it progresses in the classic Nichijou style. But then suddenly Yuko accidentally ends up complimenting Mio, to which Mio was flustered at first. Mio then tries to continue the argument but ends up complimenting Yuko as well. Yuko then does the same again. Then at this point the situation has changed entirely to where they're now screaming compliments at each other trying to one-up the other. They both glare intensely at each other, steadily raise their arms, and they shake hands. The argument is now over, and they now appreciate each other's friendship again, much to the rest of the class's relief. I think this scene accurately sums up what Nichijou is all about very well. Absurd, yet beautiful. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other, and sometimes it's both, saying something really sweet in the most absurd way possible. And that's pretty cool. So yeah, if you listen to all this and think that you'd like it, or even just want to try out something new, I highly recommend you give it a shot. It is super underappreciated and deserves way more publicity. I'm not even the type of person who's super interested in slice of life as a genre, but I still ended up watching all 26 episodes in the end. It's a neat show, and if this video helped even just one person discover Nichijou and love it as a result, then I'm happy with that. And my job is... Oh god. Oh my god. What is this? Ain't no way people could be shameless enough to wear this sort of thing out in public. This is ridiculous. If only there were a way I could celebrate my love for anime without losing my dignity. But you can. I can? Yes, by growing a backbone. And also thanks to today's sponsor, Bakuretsu! Bakuretsu is an online clothing brand that specializes with minimalist anime streetwear that actually looks cool. See, now this is what I'm talking about. Still clearly anime, and yet it's subtle, fashionable, and best of all, it's designed by people who actually care about anime and put on pop culture references that only fellow weebs will notice and appreciate. Now I can finally go out and wear my merch with pride. For the most part. You know what's good? Time to assert dominance. Look at the Kakao t-shirt, look at it! It is super comfortable and light in the shoulders, and yet still sturdy and strong. After all, they only use the best eco-friendly materials in all of their products. And all you need to do to get it is to go to bakuretsu.co, also linked in the description. It'll help me out a lot too, since more engagement is always a good thing for the channel. You can also use the promo code BRTalks to get a small discount off of your first offer, which is also very cool. Huge thanks once again to Bakuretsu for sponsoring today's video, and for just having awesome products in general. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Brandon Riley, and squatting is good for the bones. Special thanks to Bondrude, Off ASMR, Kamosune, Dr. Nefarious, Revent, Megamine Over Darkness, and all my other patrons supporting me on Patreon. If you also want your name to be here, as well as seeing exclusive behind the scenes content and extra scripts I never turn into videos, then simply click the Patreon button in the middle of the screen to see more.